Mr. Ware, welcome to the committee.
Madam
Please
Chair,
tell us your
thank you
story.
for the opportunity to be here. I'd just like to tell you a little bit about the Nuvaira story. I won't get too much into the science of the company, but I want to start out, before I do that, with just a little bit about my personal background and why I'm here. I grew up in Michigan. I ultimately went on and became a medical doctor. I was a cardiologist. I trained at the University of California, San Francisco. Then I went back to Michigan, where I practiced cardiology for about 10 years in Ann Arbor, Michigan. At that point, I got the entrepreneurial bug and wanted to leave medical practice and try and develop my own medical products. And at that time, I got my initial financing from a venture capital firm in San Francisco, where I had done my medical training. And when I was just about ready to start that company, two medical device executives here from the Twin Cities called me up, and this was in the year 2000, and convinced me that Minneapolis would be a better place to do this than San Francisco. And I still remember the look on my wife's face when I told her I changed my mind and we were going to go to Minneapolis instead of back to San Francisco, where she had relatives. But we did. We came to Minneapolis, and when I got here, those medical device executives, one was from Medtronic, one was from what was at that time called SciMed, went on my board of directors, and they became my mentors, you know, for how to build my first medical device company. And I think that really is the key to what's great, you know, and creates a medical device ecosystem here, is the ability of past people who have been here, who are willing to give back and try and teach other people that want to be an entrepreneur how to do it. And I never would have had success if it weren't for those people. Right now I'm on my third company in Minneapolis. My first company, which I started in 2000, was ultimately bought by St. Jude Medical about 5 years later. And my second company, which I started in 2006, in 2011, was bought by C.R. Bard. This is my third company. This company I did not found. The company was actually founded in St. Louis at Washington University, and then its initial early animal work was done in Seattle, Washington. When the company was about 4 years old, and up here is a little bio of the company called Nuvaira, the company that I'm developing now. When the company was approximately 4 years old and they had really excellent animal data that they had developed, they decided to go recruit a CEO that had a track record of having successfully developed, you know, these types of high-tech companies. They recruited me, and they said to me, if you come here and be the CEO, the investor said, well, we'll let you put the company in whatever city you want to put it. And so I moved the company from Seattle, Washington, to Minneapolis, where it's been since approximately 2013. And I still remember the look on the company, on the, I don't know, the 12 or 13 employees that existed at that time in Seattle, and the company, their face when I told them I was moving the company to Minneapolis, because it kind of looked about like my wife's face looked when I told her I was coming here. So anyway, we moved the company here. I've been here for 7 years now running this company. And as you see on this chronologic history, it's a long time and a long path to develop a true high-tech, what's called novel device that's never been done before. It's generally, in today's world, it's called a PMA track with the FDA. To develop this kind of a thing, generally, most people would say takes somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 years. And it's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $150 to $200 million to do that type of a device. At this point, we've raised $150 million in this company. Last February, we raised our most recent round of financing, which was $79 million, which was designed to run our pivotal clinical trial. This is our fourth trial. We've done phase 1 trial, two phase 2 trials, and we're now in the middle of our pivotal clinical trial. What we do is we treat COPD, and this procedure is done through a flexible bronchoscope. You can see a flexible bronchoscope there going through down a patient's throat and into his windpipe. What the physician operator does is through that bronchoscope, he applies thermal energy, RF energy, to the right and left mainstem bronchus to attenuate the nerves that go to the lungs. And when you do that, attenuate these nerves, they're called the parasympathetic nerves, you are able to achieve a permanent generalized bronchodilation. Your airways open up. So in patients that have severe COPD or severe asthma that drugs are no longer successful for, you can go do this therapy and get a much more powerful effect for opening the airways. This is just a cartoon of our device, deployed in the left mainstem bronchus. The procedure takes about an hour to do. It can actually be done. Right now we're doing all of our cases as an inpatient, but the procedure can actually be done as an outpatient. And people go, well, why would that work? I mean, these nerves are there for a purpose. Why would that work? Well, medical literature is filled with the rationale for why it works to tap down these nerve effects. And in fact, trying to tap down these nerve effects is how the current drugs that are used to treat COPD and asthma work. Literally these inhalers that you see people taking that have these drugs that sell tens and tens of billions of dollars worldwide are actually done trying to block these nerves. The problem is that when you inhale these drugs through an inhaler, the drugs will preferentially go to the open airways, but not to necessarily the closed ones where you want it to go. So by going in and directly affecting the nerves directly, you can get a more robust effect from the denervation procedure. This is a very quick summary of our clinical trial, human clinical trials done over the last 7 years. I mentioned phase 1 trial, phase 2A, phase 2B. All of these studies are published. The most recent one, the phase 2B trial, Airflow 2, was published as recently as November. It was that data that allowed us to raise the $79 million financing to run the pivotal trial, which is being done at 30 medical centers around the world right now as we speak. And why were people willing to give us $79 million to run this pivotal trial? Well, it's illustrated right here on this slide. This was a randomized, double-blind, sham-controlled trial. That means that both the patient and the doctor did not know whether they actually got the real therapy or whether they got a sham therapy. And by sham, we mean they got the bronchoscope put down, the catheter put down. The only thing that was different is the energy wasn't turned on. Randomized, double-blind, sham-controlled. And what we found out is that the patients that got the TLD, that stands for targeted lung denervation treatment, their adverse events, their recurrent respiratory events were reduced by more than 50%. And you go, what were those events that were reduced? Well, the patients that got this therapy had less recurrent bronchitis, less pneumonia, less shortness of breath, and fewer COPD exacerbations, following this procedure. It was this data that, as I said, that allowed us to go ahead and run the pivotal trial. The FDA said that the primary endpoint for our clinical trial would have to be COPD exacerbations. COPD exacerbations are what is called the holy grail of clinical endpoints for COPD. What an exacerbation is, it's when one of these patients who has COPD or asthma suddenly has a worsening of their symptoms that is so bad they have to go seek medical attention right then, and in some cases actually have to be admitted to the hospital, for more aggressive therapy like on a respirator and an intensive care unit. These recurrent hospitalizations are among the most expensive hospitalizations that happen in the country. They can literally, a week in an intensive care unit for one of these exacerbations can easily run $50,000 hospital bill. And what happened from our therapy on these exacerbations is the purple line up there on the right, and the graph on the right shows how we reduced recurrent hospitalizations in patients with COPD compared to the control arm, which is the gray arm. The graph on the left compares our therapy to reducing just moderate exacerbations, those kind that can be managed on an outpatient basis. But this was regarded as relatively stunning by the pulmonologists and the experts that deal with lung disease. If we are able to reproduce this result in the pivotal trial that we're running right now, this will be one of the really exciting stories in the medical device world. And we are approximately a year and a half from when we'll be able to turn over the card, so to speak, and see the data on the pivotal trial. Pivotal trial has 500 patients in it. And if you have any interest in learning more about that trial or anything, we have two websites. We have, the airflow. It's the airflow trial is the name of the study. There's a website for the trial. There's also a LinkedIn website. It's on your slide there for anybody that has more interest in this, but in learning about it. But that is what Nuvaira does. Nothing like this has ever been done before. So, and this benefit that you saw here. To be eligible for the trial, you have to be on optimal drug therapy, meaning these are COPD patients that are on what's called triple drug therapy. And this benefit that I demonstrated to you is on top of optimal drug therapy. Thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Questions from members? So I saw there was a crossover point on the slides. Is that when this procedure is starting to not be as effective?
No, what that is,
Okay.
I'm glad you asked that question, because at 1 year, when these patients had been followed up for 1 year, the patients that had gotten the sham procedure, that did not get the active treatment, those patients were told after 1 year that they did not get the active therapy, and they were given the opportunity to then be given the therapy. Those are called crossover patients. So it turns out about half of the patients that were in the sham arm elected to say, okay, I'm really disappointed, but I'll take the procedure now. So the crossover began halfway through the trial, and so that's when patients had the opportunity to actually get the therapy, and the patients that crossed over have had the same benefit, that we've re-demonstrated in the crossover patients, the same benefit again. Now that data has not been presented yet, but it will be presented this spring at the American Thoracic Society meeting in May. Will be seen for the first time. That's why I don't actually have a slide up here showing what that data was, but that'll be coming out in May, which will add more excitement about this therapy when it does come out.
Excellent. Dr. Klein. Sorry, Senator Klein.
Chair, thank you for a very fascinating presentation, and I'm restraining myself from asking all sorts of nerdy internal medicine questions. First of all, my concern is that if you stop people coming into the hospital for COPD, I won't have a job any longer. So,
I don't think you have to worry about that.
Typically, these are reported out as changes in pulmonary function tests. Do you have any data along those lines?
Yes,
Mr. Bear.
Pulmonary function test, FEV1, the standard spirometry test done on COPDs are all secondary endpoints in this trial, and we've tracked them in all of our patients. And the pulmonary function tests improve, along, with the therapy. From the FDA's perspective right now, they consider pulmonary function tests a surrogate endpoint. They really encourage you to track hardcore diagnoses, like exacerbations and bronchitis and pneumonia. But those are being tracked. But the pulmonary function tests improve also.
Anything further? So, is there a point at which these people will no longer need a drug? Will this be a substitute for medication?
No, this is, we're not reversing the disease here. What we're doing is we're trying to slow its progression. Drugs have never slowed the progression of COPD. They can make COPD patients feel better, but they just slowly keep getting worse over time. We're hoping that by reducing these recurrent exacerbations and pneumonias, that the patients won't decline as fast. They'll feel better, but the real win here would be if we can slow the progression, and then you would have the opportunity to maybe prolong life, if you do that. But you won't cure the disease.